So hi everyone, thanks so much for taking your lunch hour to spend together. I'm Hope. I am the life design educator for student leadership and involvement. And so my role is to support students in the co-curricular space and thinking about how you can really intentionally design your experience at Hopkins to dig into your interests, to think about what skills you want to gain and how those might then translate to your first job out of college or what you hope to do with your life. So I'm really excited to partner with Nicole and with Nadine on this session. We've got three fantastic alumni who are here to share a bit about their own arts experiences, but also how they've translated their passions and their interests into their specific jobs and their specific roles. And this was a topic that certain arts organization leaders shared with us back in the spring was really interesting and exciting for them. And so we tried to put it on in the spring. We know that there was, everyone shifted off campus, so we postponed it now to the fall. But we're just so happy that you're here to join us. I'm going to pass it to Nicole to introduce herself.
Great, thanks Hope, and hi everyone. So yeah, I'm Nicole Wilson. I am Director of Homewood Arts Programs. I've been in that position now, this is into my second year. And I've been at Hopkins now for going on 10 years, originally with Hopkins Symphony Orchestra as the general manager. My background is in performance and arts management and nonprofit management. And so, in my role with Homewood Arts is really about presenting and curating arts opportunities for students on campus, but then also providing mentorship and guidance for the 50 student arts organizations that are on campus that are around performance and visual arts and beyond. So it's been great to kind of poll all of the students and organizations about kind of what they want to get out of their arts organization experience and take the information from those to provide meaningful experiences for you all. So yeah, thank you.
Unfortunately, Eileen, something came up for her, so she had to pop out. I'll send her the recording. Nadine, would you go ahead and introduce yourself too?
Yeah, sure. So my name's Nadine Goldberg, and I also work at the Life Design Lab, which I always mention when we have alumni around, was formerly the Career Center. That's how you might remember it. And my role involves working with all of our humanities majors. And then previously I was working focused on an industry cluster. We used to be organized that way, and I worked with our arts, media, and marketing interest group. So lots of tie-ins to this event, and I'm really glad to be collaborating.
I appreciate it. Great. Would you mind just introducing yourself and maybe telling us what you're majoring in and what you're involved in on campus so we can get a sense of how to tailor some of our questions to you?
My name is Gray. I'm currently a sophomore majoring in writing seminars. I might be majoring in history as well. We shall see after I survive undergraduate history seminar. I'm also involved in Witness Theater, Barnstormers, and the Inter-Theater Council. Am I allowed to say that? Yes.
Perfect. Thank you. That's really helpful. Okay, let's hear from our panelists. So I'd love for y'all, and I'll do the awkward calling on because it's just more helpful. I'd love to hear, introduce yourself, what you majored in, kind of what your arts experiences were while you were at Hopkins, and then maybe just give us a quick overview of what your current role is. So let's go ahead. I'll just do it alphabetically. So let's start with Justin, and then we'll go to Nicole, and then Rose.
Great. Thanks so much for having me. This is a lot of fun. I am a Peabody alum. I was in the Doctoral Musical of Arts program from 2003 to 2005 and ultimately received a graduate performance diploma in 2010. I did my undergrad at Boston University, master's at University of Missouri, where I was an assistant and performed with the faculty brass quintet and had my own studio. I perform often still. I do a regular series at Carnegie Hall. I've done 10 Broadway tours, performed for Dina Menzel, Mannheim Steamroller every year. And most recently, right before lockdown, I performed with The Who, which was incredible for those few days. When I'm not performing, my current position is publications manager of RIPM, the International Music Research Center that's based right here in Baltimore. they index and digitize old music journals, and we've gotten into a lot of more current jazz journals and really big database that a lot of people are excited about in the jazz field. It's been stuck in libraries, and we've brought it to everybody through our database.
That's so wonderful. Thanks, Justin. Go ahead, Nicole.
Yeah, so my name is Nicole. I graduated undergraduate from Hopkins in 2016, where I was an art history major, a museums and society minor, and I also did the entrepreneurship and management minor. While I was at Hopkins, I was really involved in the founding of a journal called the Hopkins Exhibitionist, which is part of the program in Museums and Society. And I worked at the BMA, because it is in Hopkins' backyard, with the contemporary curators. And it was an incredible experience just to learn from them. And they're so generous. I highly recommend always reaching out to the people there. So thoughtful. But after I graduated from Hopkins, I was working a little bit in Venice in a museum on a program at the Peggy Guggenheim collection. My focus at Hopkins was definitely in modern and contemporary art, with an emphasis on notions of gender in the 20th and 21st century, which manifested itself in a myriad of ways in terms of research. Following that experience, I moved to my hometown of New York, where I am now. And I apologize, they just started doing construction across the street from me. So if you hear banging, I apologize. But I began by working in commercial gallery spaces. I was working at what is I believe like the second largest player in the kind of contemporary commercial gallery space, Hauser and Wirth, in New York. And I was doing both doing admin work, but also project management for historical exhibitions. One was a private collection show that really ran the gambit in terms of art from the 20th century. One was a very arte povera centric show, which was really interesting. I also worked on art fairs, and that was a huge part of my time there, which was really interesting, and a very important kind of business side to what happens in art. Following that experience, I went to a slightly smaller gallery called Gladstone, and during my time there, I was working really on the secondary market, which just basically means I was working on resales and wasn't getting a lot of opportunities to work with artists. And so me and a coworker, I guess in a kind of reactionary way, ended up starting our own project space in Brooklyn that was basically dedicated to kind of providing this two-pronged service to artists that we were not really seeing represented in the traditional gallery spaces that we were looking at in Chelsea. So the first was obviously giving them kind of financial opportunity through exhibitions, marketing those exhibitions, helping them raise some funds. And the other side of it was really through education, because galleries are often or can be a bit of a predatory industry when you're coming out of your BFA or your MFA. Not all programs across the board really emphasize that market education. So we really helped artists understand how to review contracts, what general expectations be, how to negotiate on behalf of themselves, which was for me just an incredibly empowering and meaningful experience. And what I realized in doing that experience was that my influence was very micro. It was a group of maybe, you can only work with so many artists, about like 30 or so artists. And we had a dedicated audience, I would say, of about 200 to 500 given the exhibition, individuals who would come in and out, but that to me felt really small. And so I decided that what I realized is that I have this kind of basic understanding of how to run the books, how to manage a business from actually the, I guess, entrepreneurship and management studies that I had at Hopkins. But I really wanted to be able to go into the social impact space and to be able to be an effective leader in a way that is thoughtful and thorough and efficient. So I decided to apply for my MBA. And so now I have my, to the side. This is the Columbia Business School logo. I'm at Columbia Business School. It's my first semester. And right now, I mean, I'm just really getting like the fundamental basics, which is somewhere between like the intersection of, you know, what you do in the E&M minor at Hopkins and what I assume happened in econ, which I did not take any classes in. But it's been really amazing for me. And I'm just thinking about how to probably go into either development roles in the nonprofit space. I clearly like to talk. I'm a storyteller, as opposed to being like hyper focused on sales and thinking about my impact in that area.
You've got such a good life design winding path that we can all learn from. Thank you so much. Rose, can you share a little bit about your experience?
Sure. So I moved to Baltimore to attend Peabody. So I did my undergrad from 2000 to 2004 in saxophone performance. I was technically in the classical program, but the jazz department was just starting out there as well. And I spent probably about half my time with those folks. And also took a couple classes with the computer music department to fulfill my like liberal arts requirements. And then ended up doing a master's in computer music. And again, spent about half my time with the jazz department during those 2 years as well. And during that time, got more connected with the local music and arts community in Baltimore, including the experimental improvised music community, and got into helping them organize. So I helped run the High Zero Festival, which is an annual international music festival that happens in Baltimore. And we also run shows in a sort of a DIY space, the Red Room, which is affiliated with Normal's Books and Records, if you're familiar with them. I've played with lots of bands in town. In terms of like my professional career, coming out of college, I did a lot of teaching initially, both like college and private lessons, and sort of cobbled things together. Worked at Hopkins in the media lab there for a few years. Then sort of stumbled into the startup scene, was involved with an educational sort of maker spacey nonprofit for a year or so, Digital Harbor Foundation at the beginning of that. And then co-founded a tech startup that was focused on the education space and pivoted into more corporate education. That's Yet Analytics. They're still going. A couple years ago, realized that like what the company needed and what I needed had kind of diverged. And so I took some time to try to figure out what I wanted to do next. A startup is an interesting place to learn a lot of things that you didn't know that you needed to know. It's like entrepreneurship skills, business skills, but also like if you're a co-founder, you gotta like figure out how to do something that the business needs done. So I spent time doing interface design and usability and marketing and graphic design. So picked up a bunch of different skills through lots of reading, lots of practical experience, and doing it poorly and then getting a little bit better and doing it a little bit better. And ended up landing at SmartLogic, where I work now, focused more on the marketing aspect, although I occasionally still do some like visual design for them as well. And so I'm a sole marketer in a relatively small organization. I think we're like 18 people now. So anything marketing related that needs done, from writing articles to managing social accounts to making like sales resources for our sales people, to helping our team members pitch to conferences that they want to present at, and helping with presentation prep, all that stuff. That's all stuff that I do. And I'll just to say, like, in terms of how the arts are or are not integrated into my life, I've structured my life in such a way that I have a day job that I enjoy that allows me the freedom to spend almost all of my free time playing in bands, attending shows, curating shows, being really involved with the music community. So it's literally like I've anchored my life around it, although my career is not in music, if that makes any sense.
That's exactly what we needed to hear, Rose. we need to feel motivated to do that.
Yeah.
I think that leads us into one of the questions I really did want us to explore a bit more is just, maybe, Rose, you can kind of start again, but giving us a sense of how you navigated that decision-making process, right? Figuring out whether or not you wanted art to be a vital part of your career, like where times or spaces you all have seen that kind of come out, or, were you able to kind of section your life in such a way where the arts were kind of more of a co-curricular, like we would think about it in undergraduate. So I guess if you could share, all of you share a little bit about, what was your thought process as you were integrating art into your life and into your career?
So for me, a lot of the art that I really like making is not super profitable. So like experimental improvised music, very low margins, right? Like we run a space that has no overhead. Like we run the bookstore when we run shows. So the bookstore makes a little bit of money and we don't have to pay rent, right? So part of the math for me was like, how do I get to choose to spend time on stuff that I want to spend time on and not have to basically just like avoid the work of figuring out how to do profitable music work. Which is not to say that that's not a viable path. It just wasn't the path that I was attracted to at the time. Yeah. So, I mean that, and the other thing that I'll say is like I have a lot of friends who are musicians. Most of my friends are musicians, and there are a lot of different ways to balance like where your money comes from and how you spend your time, right? So having a stable, like a full-time job gives me economic stability, right? Which like, that's a thing that I value, that's useful to me, which means that there are other choices I get to make. I have friends who just make their living from music. And so like the hustle is real. Like if you don't figure out like what you're doing for the next whatever, then I don't know, there's less reliability or consistency to it. It's sort of like being a small business owner. Like you got to figure out all the stuff. And there's lots of in-betweens too, right? Like you could have some steady work and some music. I don't know. There's lots of ways to make it work. But for me, I found work that was interesting enough and flexible enough that I could still do the music stuff I wanted to do, but I could also have the economic stability and not have to worry about like, where's my next month's mortgage payment coming from?
Yeah, that balance is so important and so personal.
Mm-hmm.
Justin, how have you seen that play out for you in your decision making?
Well, that's something Rose was exactly right when she said it's the flexibility. So I just thought I was going to be a performer, and there wasn't really a kind of question. I would just go win an audition and go play in the local symphony and teach at the local college. That's what we all kind of thought of. Rose and I did overlap a little bit at Peabody, and I was already in my doctoral studies. And by the time I started undergrad and finished my doctoral studies, and in those handful of years, in those 8 years, the orchestra scene has changed a lot. So it wasn't just go win an audition or teach at the local college and play in the local orchestra. So it's trying to figure out the balance between how much you want to either perform, for me, how much either to perform, how much I am performing. Is it going to pay all the bills? Is it not? So trying to find that flexibility. When I first moved back to Baltimore, I was living in Florida for a bit. I was working in a music store, and that's something I can talk about later. Just arts was important. I wanted to keep in the arts. I also grew up sailing and playing a lot of sports. So any job that I had related either to teaching sailing, working on some boats, or working in the arts. I also, for summer, refereed at a sports league in Boston. So I have a couple interests, and why would I go work somewhere else? So be it a music store, or luckily got involved with this research center. So trying to find something that interested me. Why am I going to go work at a bank 9 to 5? That's something that's not interesting to me. I wanted to perform. I wanted to be in the arts. So I wanted to be surrounded by the arts. And it's great to have that flexibility, or try to find a job that's part-time enough, full-time. My job is actually part-time,
Mhm.
which is great. So then when I go on tour for a week at a time, I can still work remotely. If I'm in Europe for part of the summer performing, I have that flexibility. So it's great to find that balance. And again, why would I want to go work somewhere else? Arts are important to me, performing is important, like-minded people. So I really wanted to kind of find that and have people that understand that when I say, hey, can I take off early to come do something like this? Or I have very lucky, I have a gig this afternoon. So if I have to leave early, it's okay, yeah, sure, whatever, no problem, and get my work done. So that's really important, trying to find a job in the arts, related to the arts. I've looked into other positions before that, arts management. I knew someone who was basically an agent. That's in the arts. I understand it. I performed. I would have to learn a little bit, but that was what I was looking for and interested in.
Nicole, how about you? How have you kind of navigated your passion for the arts and figuring out how to, make that part of your life, whether through career or personal?
Yeah, so I mean, prior to basically right now, almost every job I have ever had has been in the arts. I started like at 16, I worked at a photo history library. I worked in an artist studio. I worked at auction houses. I worked in galleries and museums before even having really a full-time job. So for me, I think that also might just be a product of my upbringing, that I like truly did grow up like living and breathing the arts. That being said, I think my story is a little different because I myself, while I did pursue creative things, I was never really a self-identified maker of art. I definitely was more of an art historian. And so what I did effectively after college was very similar to what Justin was just mentioning. Art galleries are essentially agents in many ways. It's like agents, except we have like a shop downstairs where you can see a featured even like star who we represent essentially. So for me, those spaces were really incredible for me to continue thinking about creatively about what the arts were. A lot of, my social life was centered around being in creative spaces, and working at certain galleries also will give you kind of access to museum openings and different events where I was networking with other like-minded people. So the arts, I think there is for visual art. I mean, and as I've spoken with many of like my peers from Hopkins who were writing SEMS majors, many of them are working in the publishing space, and they seem to really like it. I will say for all of us, there's definitely across music, writing SEMS, art history, this kind of secondary life that comes with your full-time job, no matter what. For my friend who's writing SEMS, like he's constantly writing on his own and workshopping things to hopefully eventually write a novel. I was truly going to artist studio visits, museums, seeing other galleries that weren't necessarily in the neighborhood of my office with all of my free time. But I think also the arts are a space that are really inspirational. And I think it does give people that kind of juice and energy to keep going, even if you are, balancing maybe a full-time role that isn't necessarily creative, or you aren't necessarily doing, I wasn't writing papers about what I was interested in at my gallery jobs. But I was getting to, think about the arts and then use my free time to really tap into those spaces.
This is all such great information. Gray, I wanted to check in with you to see if you're having any thoughts or questions that you wanted to pose to the group.
I'm an international student, so as much as I would like to hear everyone's account on their own experience, it's quite inapplicable for me because my status as an American inapplicable to me. But I mean, everyone made it work, so it does give me hope that maybe in the future I can make it work as well.
Maybe if any, does anyone on the panel have any kind of, acquaintances or connections with people who are, from an international kind of background or doing the arts in an international space? Maybe that could, provide some insights into things to check out.
I'm happy to speak a little about that. I mean, almost all the companies that I have worked for, like auction houses and art galleries, they're all international spaces that have offices, you know, offices all over the world. My last company was just in Europe and the States. The company before was East Coast, West Coast, offices in like 5 locations in Europe. They have a space in Shanghai and a full gallery space in Hong Kong, and they're only growing by the day. So I think that I met in my time at those companies many counterparts to myself in similar roles who were doing the same exact thing in, different countries. Obviously things were different. I remember, like, for example, like the Swiss office for my old company, the average age of someone at my level, which was like a very entry level position, was much older because, the benefits there are just incredible and incentivize people to stay in these roles for a long time. They also got like a lot more vacation, and maybe the work level of the New York office, not to say like I would move to Switzerland in a heartbeat. Sounds like these people are living life, but to say like the level of work in New York was a bit more demanding. But for the most part, otherwise, every other person who I encountered had a very parallel experience to mine.
Actually, I've been lucky to have done this music festival in Austria for a number of summers. And some of the people I know are full-time in the orchestras in the area. A friend of mine is one of the top trumpet players in the world, and he's traveled and plays in the Bavarian Radio Orchestra. So besides people like that just win every job and get invited to jobs, one specific person I can think of, and like Nicole was saying, it's pretty parallel to here. One of the main administrators in Austria for the festival is a vocalist. And when it's not the summer, she's performing all year. She's also working for the festival. I think she's full-time. So it's kind of the same situation as here. Find an organization that has flexibility. You can still perform in the evening. It's obviously an arts organization, so they understand if you're gone for a couple days. So it seems to be somewhat similar here. She's trying to find work in the arts while still being able to perform. The performance space, forget even the last 8 months, the performance space has changed recently. If the Metropolitan Opera can have financial problems last year, what's it like for Rose's position doing experimental jazz if the Met is having problems? So I think it's similar, and it's just trying to find your way in your interests. I think that's pretty universal, no matter where it is.
Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit as well. I think, from a student's perspective and, and international or otherwise, but knowing, a lot of classmates and colleagues that I've had who have had international status in the US, is it really is a lot connected to, either your school commitment or, or otherwise. So I think, finding opportunities, with whatever given commitment you have in your degree or an internship or things that make your experiences possible, are really important. And then also, definitely echoing what Justin was talking about in terms of, the arts in other parts of the world, in some places, are actually going to be more supported, and there might be more opportunities where they are more state funded and supported, and kind of having systems through that actually the US does lag behind a lot of other countries. So, you may even, depending on, where you have access and availability to, may find, theaters and other programs that you have access to that, might even be more than what you might find, here in the States as well. But certainly, kind of, I think, focus looking to see what you're interested in and then where those opportunities are, you know, to kind of have those official points as well as, you know, friends and colleagues and recommendations, or, you know, all things that are going to be helpful for you.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that insight there. I think the one thing that I'm thinking about now that, you know, I've heard a little bit more about each of your stories is how you've kind of told your art story, you know, as you go along through these different, you know, winding twists and turns in your journey. I think one of the biggest questions we get from students is, how do I talk to a potential employer about the skills or the experiences I've had to make me, you know, there's sometimes very clearly a connection where I can, you know, really leverage that. But if there's seemingly kind of a disconnect, like I have all these great arts experiences, but they might not immediately translate to a specific position I'm applying for, what advice would you have in how to talk about your arts experiences?
I have some thoughts on that. As I got more involved in the startup community in Baltimore, I realized that a lot of the skills that I had developed through like being very active in the DIY music scene in Baltimore, like had direct translation in terms of value to working on a new business. So like if you, as someone being creative in the arts, ever organize anything, promote anything, like build anything, like all of those skills are tremendously important. Project management is a skill that's useful in any business role, right? Promotion is incredibly valuable. So like think about, you know, like if you take your, you know, as an artist, you may think about your experience as being anchored around the medium that you work in and the content that you create. But if you think about the process that you use both to create that work and to share it, and any collaboration skills, like those all are incredibly useful. And I feel that people who have experience making stuff, working in the arts, have a ton of super useful skills that they just might not know how to talk about, right? So think about like, what is your actual process, and just think about like how you might apply that in another setting, because those skills are super valuable. And I think that many traditional academic topics that we think of as like maybe translating directly into a given field, like those don't necessarily give you those other skills. So yeah, that's my thought. I hope that makes sense. Please ask clarifying questions if that seems like nonsense, because yeah. You're muted.
I was just saying it's perfect,
Okay.
Literally so perfect. Justin, Nicole, did you have any thoughts on how you might talk about your arts experiences and skills you've gained?
I can discuss, since I'm definitely in the process of a pivot, and I'm working on an arts foundation. I think similar to writing SEMS, art history is a lot about thinking about how to describe things in unique ways. And I think any skill set you have can kind of be, I feel like manipulated makes it sound like you're doing something bad, but you're not doing something bad, but can be employed in a way that fits basically any job description. I mean, for example, something, you know, I did at my business, ZH Projects, that I would write about is like, I would be like, you know, I would do studio visits or something like that. Like I did a lot of studio visits to build this network of artists. So I say like relationship building, you know, fostering a network, like you can really translate a lot of things into more corporate terms, are like terms for any kind of sector. And I think the best way to go about that also is to just even look at a typical either like LinkedIn job description for that job, like that particular role, or sample resumes for someone in, you know, like corporate finance or something like that. And you use that foundation to rewrite what you have done. Like, for example, I probably would not have necessarily talked about like the revenues my business was making, were it not for my business school application, where I was like, oh, I really should add this up and see like what our actual profits are. Because most of our revenues just went back in artists' pockets and then went to rent. And I was like, oh, okay, so this is like our profit in terms of like how much we're spending annually. And anyway, so you can just be creative with it, basically.
I think there's two things in there. One, as Hope mentioned, how to talk to people. The first thing is, I think just tell them what you've done. Going through an arts education, if you're talking to someone who is in the arts field, they're going to understand where you are and where you've come from, most likely, at least a little bit, even if someone is in music or art history. As my position now is, I was mostly performance, but I definitely did lots of research and definitely understand and definitely even used our own products many years later, end up working for them. So I think it's just sitting down and talking to someone and putting yourself out there enough, keep your mind open enough that you can take any even half opportunity that comes along and see what you can do with that. Talk to the people, say, look, I'm a performer. I have this, I have the interpersonal skills. I worked in an orchestra. Just like people always talk about the arts. I know maybe doing solo things or solo instruments is a little bit different than being in ensembles since you were 7 years old. Same with sports. You're working towards a common goal. You have interpersonal skills. You work together to reach a goal. So just tell them, look, I'm a performer. I've done this. I've done these things. At the music festival, I was stage crew manager. So I have a lot of organizational skills and in a foreign language that I don't really speak well. So how I think I would be good for this job, but just like what you do when you write a cover letter, just here's my great experiences and here's where I think I'm strong with my arts background, working with people, working within a section, working for a conductor or director. How would that translate into either this job or a job, or if it's someone you know, what jobs do you think I can look for with this experience? You know me, let's sit down for some coffee. And I think that's what I didn't really get. Even in 8 years of school, I'm gonna win an audition. And that just doesn't really exist anymore. So being open-minded enough, not just even open-minded about not really changing careers, but for me, I was an orchestral player. The first big concert I did was with a rock orchestra. That was not something I've done. There's no conductor. I have all kinds of electronics and microphones everywhere. I have smoke coming out from under my chair. That was not your Peabody Symphony Orchestra. So all the video game orchestras I've done with a big screen above me, like that's not regular symphony. I did not train for that. So keeping your mind open enough that you can switch either tracks even a little bit, or even if it's all the way into arts administration when you're a performer, I think there's a lot out there if you keep your mind open, talk to people, and find out where you might be able to fit or where you can take your experiences and what's important, what's maybe not, and how you can kind of parlay that into something else.
I had one more thought, which is just that, like, just going off of what you were saying, Justin, about talking to people. Like, if you know someone who works in a field that you're sort of interested in, like, talk to them, sit down and talk to them about your background, talk to them about what their field is like, talk to them about whether it seems like there's an overlap, because they can help you understand that framing, like Nicole was talking about. Like, what are the skills that you have? How do they relate to that industry? How does that industry talk about them? How does that role talk about those skills? Because you'll find that even from job to job within the same industry, it could be that a similar concept or skill set is framed differently, is talked about differently, and knowing that language that the employer will understand, that they're looking for, will help you to like get to actually have that conversation with that employer. So just talk to people, find people in your network. Could be like people who are your friends, people who are your friends' friends, like your parents, like whoever, right? Just talk to them, because they'll help you understand the framing.
That's all great advice. I think too, one thing that would be interesting to dive just a bit deeper in. I think we've like started to scratch the surface in a lot of ways, but is this idea of like a conventional career and figuring out how to kind of carve your own place within that. Like, I think there's, you know, sometimes a lot of preconceived notions or just kind of parameters that exist. And how have you been able to kind of in a conventional space more so make sure that it really fits you and who you are and what you're hoping to gain?
I have some thoughts on this. I think that more and more like the notion of a conventional career is sort of a myth. Just like Justin was talking about with orchestras, like I think that that's sort of also true even with just other organizations. There's just a lot of change happening, and yeah, and so so one, like, build a life that's interesting for you, right? Whatever like notions you have of like what your life should be or could be or whatever, like don't let that get in the way of making decisions that are going to lead you to the life that's most interesting and fulfilling for you. I feel like that's a trap. That's a trap for all of us. Society gives us. And so then I'm forgetting what the other part of the question was. Sorry.
No, that's perfect. So then how did you kind of carve your own space for yourself to really be able to show up as who you are, you know, despite some of these tensions?
Yeah. So I would say that like, given that like the typical career is sort of a myth, you have to sort of find your own path. And for me, like finding that path is like, what opportunities that are interesting, that are available to me, can I avail myself of? And that's not just paid opportunities, that's also like random art stuff that was fun or weird or interesting, right? And all of those things are valuable, and they're kind of valuable, they cross-pollinate. So like skills that I developed through, again, DIY arts organizing stuff are super useful to me in my professional life. Skills that I've developed in my professional life are then also useful to me in my arts organizing life. Like I can help my collaborators figure out good framing for a grant proposal because I have spent years doing marketing work and understanding how to communicate across different perspectives, right? So anyways, all of those things are valuable and useful. And yeah, and you just have to find the right balance for you. And so some of the choices that you're making are about like, what kind of career do you want to have? What kind of job do you want to have? Some of the choices you're making are, what kind of an organization do I want to work at? Do I want to work at an organization that has a really rigid structure? Do I want to work at an organization that like lets me grow? Like, so those are priorities for me, right? I want an organization that is diverse. Like, I don't want to be in an office where everybody looks like everybody else. It's just a priority for me, right? That's an indicator for me that I can be myself. I want to work at an organization where I get to grow and learn, right? And so these are like questions you ask when you're interviewing, or like stuff that you look at on the website of the organization to try to understand what you'd be getting yourself into. You can also ask people who work there. Like if you can find a friend of a friend who works there or who has worked with them, they can help you understand what the culture of the team is like. And you know, like stability is important or can be important to you. Anyway, so I feel like I'm rambling a little bit, but part of finding your path is finding a space where you'll be comfortable, where you'll have work that's interesting, that's engaging, that lets you grow, all that kind of stuff.
One thing I would just love to add on, I think what Rose said is spot on, and also just from my own personal experience, and I would imagine for our panelists, a lot of the questions that Rose mentioned to ask are really important, and some of those you're also going to just find out through experience. You're going to have an internship, a job, an experience, and you'll be like, oh, this is what I love, or you'll have an experience like, oh, I'm not doing this again, you know, and then, you know, to have the strength and kind of focus to, you know, to step away from those too. So, I mean, those are also, I think, you know, you can come to those really good questions, but sometimes it's after kind of being like, oh, yeah, I did that thing before and that wasn't so great, you know, so kind of a mix of all of that.
I think building on previous experience is really important to make sure that if you do either move, I've moved a bit, or if you get a new position or whatever you do, exactly as Nicolene was saying, know what you liked, know what you didn't like, and be able to grow on that. I have used, say, Excel a number of times, but I use that every day, all the time. So if I move jobs or whenever I move again or something, I now have experience of doing something that I originally did not have. So growing on that and then making sure it's not just when you write your resume, like, oh, I did this and this, and then just go into a new job with a clean slate. Bring your experience, all of it. And I got my first teaching job at a sailing school because I had taught at the public schools before. So I knew how to be in front of people, and I'd worked with sectionals, with ensembles, worked with ensembles. So it wasn't foreign to me to be in front of either a bunch of kids or a bunch of people older than I am in a completely different setting. I have taught before, and that's how I got the job. Like, I'm good at this. I've done this, put it together. And I think that's really important when you're trying to put together a career, as Rose was saying, build on things and take that into your next position. I think that's really important. And as I said, I did sports growing up in music, and putting different things together, finding what's interesting. But if you can grow and take with you part of what you've learned, as Nicolene was saying, I don't like that. I don't want to do that again. Make sure I'm not going to be involved or in a situation where I have to do that regularly. So just make sure you're learning as you're progressing, or looking for different positions, as all my freelance friends are doing. If you like teaching, teach. If you want to do it something else, do something else. If you want to be in arts management, find that, but making sure that you would be a good fit, but also they're a good fit for you.
You all are perfect spokespeople for life design without even knowing it. So much of what you said is exactly what we hope and we encourage our students to engage in. Nicole, did you have anything you wanted to add there?
I mean, I think Rose completely nailed that question. I do think that a lot of people in the arts have like a certain kind of moral or I don't know, kind of set of needs in terms of like promoting individuality and things like that, that I think are more than what you do at the day-to-day of your job, almost just can be more important. And you could be working in a creative space that's super homogenous and realize that's not great, or you could be working in a super corporate space. Like, I just attended a lecture about like diversity at Google and about how, you know, people really are, like how many people in that space are so eager to learn and grow because that isn't necessarily their background. And I was like, wow, do I want to maybe work at Google? Like, I was really surprised by learning about these values in these spaces.
That's wonderful. Gosh, we're coming up so quickly on the 1 o'clock hour. So I wanted to just check in, you know, with anyone on the call, panelists included, if there were any kind of final questions that we wanted to pose before we wrap up.
I have one question.
Great.
In high school, there's a huge stress on extracurricular activities. So did you guys find it useful to have some in college, or did you engage in extracurricular activities that's different from what you majored in and what you were aiming for as a career? Because I think for Preacher Fest, we had a humanities speaker. I unfortunately forgot his name and his year, but I know he studied art history and he's now working at SNL, not as a writer. So I was wondering if you guys have anything that's a different passion of yours, that's like when you want to wind down from the main passion of like the arts, you have that on the side to like, you don't get a burnout.
So I don't think I had extracurriculars during college. Like, I just like ran real hard at what I was doing. by the time I was in grad school, I had a little more balance in my life, and that was when I got more involved with like the DIY scene in Baltimore. And I would say that that was not really part of what they were teaching at Peabody, but it was an important part of my social life. But in my home life now, like a couple of years after finishing grad school, I was not playing music very much, and I got really into textiles. And I have looms in my house, and I weave and I knit, and it's great. And it is super different from music, and yet like it's like I get to use my mechanical systems, like my body, right, to make interesting stuff. I get to work with color, but also like when I've made something, then I'm done with it and I can give it away. I don't have to keep making it. I don't have to like think about mistakes that I've made. It's just like done, and I get to move on. And I'm trying to think about, I also love to go hiking. I go hiking almost every weekend when the weather is good. In the summer, I go swimming. So I do try to build other extracurriculars into my life. Also garden. Yeah, they're really useful.
I can also speak a little bit about this because I am like currently in the throes of applying for board positions in many of the extracurricular spaces at Columbia. I will say at Hopkins, I wish I had taken advantage of extracurriculars in the way that I'm doing now. Because while I have like my track at school, I've realized that just getting to engage with different groups of people can also be so instrumental in influencing what you want to do. Like for example, yes, right now I'm interested in social impact. So I am working, on the nonprofit leadership projects and like a internal school board and things like that for equity. But I'm also, a member of the Wine Society because I'm really interested in understanding what it means to try like a funky organic wine. And in those places, it's really nice to meet people who have all these different backgrounds, and you learn from each other, but also having spaces to almost practice your pitch on people as well, being like, I'm Nicole, I actually worked in the arts, but I'm at business school, and this is why I want to segue. And I think those spaces are invaluable, really.
Yeah, both of you have said that being with people that are not exactly like yourself, exactly what Nicole was just saying, that's really important. As I said, I did a lot of sports. Those were not music people in high school. And then even in college, even if I was still within the arts, performing with the pep band and marching band, almost none of those, at least in Boston University, were music majors. There was a few music ed people. I know in other schools it's very different. Or at least a lot of them are in music education and they have to be in marching band, whatever. But those were very different people from outside the music department, but still we shared the arts and especially shared the love of sports. And then I was involved with intramural activities. So a friend from my floor, and here's no one in the arts, no one that I knew before. And that's a little bit like being in an ensemble, or like we always talk about with arts education, in being and working towards, like I said before, a common goal, working with people from a diverse background for something specific. So when you go into a workplace, it might not be your stereotypical orchestra with a conductor in front of you. Even if it's still within the arts, people are coming from a very different background. Even in an orchestra, people have different backgrounds, what they do in their off time. And to me, trying to connect with all those different kinds of people is really important. If you can connect with someone, then you can do your job. If you can connect with someone who's interviewing you for, like Nicole, for like an art gallery, they might have a very different background. You overlap in obviously the arts or in visual arts in that case, but really is opening your mind up, connecting with other people. So then you can grow from there and be versatile in different situations with different kinds of people, learn about different people's personalities. Even if they're in the arts, there's plenty of people with very specific personalities, and you'll see those personalities in almost every job. So how do you deal with those people and continuing to grow? And the more people you know, the more people you talk to. I have no problem talking to people and strangers. So the more you can grow and be open to different kinds of positions as you kind of find your way in a career like this, especially when Rose and I are still performing and still working in offices and trying to find your path.
And I think I'll just add real quickly, Gray, you know, you're talking about kind of the transition of the focus and how your resume and skill set looks, you know, going from high school to college, and then how that goes beyond. The couple of things I would add and also highlighted what people said is it's absolutely important to have these kind of meaningful extra co-curricular activities that are an outlet and that maybe, you know, you can just do, and like Rose was saying, leave behind. It's just a thing you do. It's fun. It's good for you mentally, physically. But then also, you know, to really think about what you are becoming an expert in. And I think that sometimes what gets lost a little bit in translation, especially from high school to college, is that you have this long checklist of like, oh yes, I did these 30 things. And as you're developing your skill set is, you know, that there is value also in having an expertise and then being able to add to that as you're going. And so to really, you know, and then be able to prop that up as, you know, something that you are confident in and that you are bringing to an organization or to a project, but then also relying on a myriad of other activities that are kind of adding to that and making it well-rounded.
Gosh, this has been such a robust conversation with so many good tidbits that I know Gray, Nicoline, me, Nadine, the students who watch this will take away. As we wrap up, I'd love if any of you, if you all want to, that's great. If just a couple, that's fine. Are there any like last single pieces of advice that you want to share with the group?
I would say just like there's no one right way to like make your life. So just like take the time to figure out what you really enjoy, you know, what makes life good for you, and orient your life around that. And don't be distracted by like other people's different paths or like idealized ideas you may have about like what a successful life is. Just build the one that's right for you.
Exactly. I think I kind of mentioned it before, but take the opportunities that come up. Don't say no. I knew a musician that wrote part of his doctoral thesis about someone who said no to a gig when they moved to town and they never played there ever again. So just because they said no to one thing. So take all the opportunities you can. If someone offers you something, figure out a way to do that, figure out a way to be part of that, even if it's not exactly what you are, even if you have to say no to something, be like, I don't know if I can do X, Y, Z, but let me learn, or can you help me learn that, or I'm interested in that. So take the opportunities you can. This isn't your grandparents or even parents' job market these days. Things are changing very quickly, especially in the last 8 months. So put yourself out there and be open and be receptive to learning something or any kind of criticism of how that specific field does that if you don't really know it. But just sliding along and thinking that everything will work out doesn't really work these days. So make yourself available, be as open as possible, talk to those people like we talked about before, ask the questions of that field. And you might know a little bit about it, know just enough to be dangerous about that field, but actually dig in, and as we all are, go ahead and open yourself up to that or new opportunities.
And I'll just chime in and say, just never underestimate what you can do. Just because you are in art history or writing seminars doesn't mean you can't go into a calculus class and get an A. I think that you're getting this unparalleled, amazing education at Hopkins, and just take advantage of all the resources are there and let that like boost your confidence just in itself, that like so much of what you do, no matter what path it will be defined by the resources, no matter the major at Hopkins. Also, I have my Pete's Grill mug right now with me, and I didn't even realize until just now, but I miss Baltimore.
That was such a perfect way to end this conversation. Gosh, thank you so much. This was to everyone for coming, to our panelists for sharing about your life experiences. This was really just so exciting to hear, and I think will be really motivating, I'm sure, not only to Gray, but to others who watch this later on. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.